Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Steve Rowan. I'm a managing partner at RSR Research. I'm joined here today by my partner, of all people, Mr. Brian Kilcourse. He and I do an awful lot of research together. Brian, say hello to the folks at home.
Hello, everybody. Happy you're here.
And the reason we've gathered today is Brian and I are going to conduct an informal conversation around a bit of research that we've done recently regarding the supply chain and how it is impacting retailers even more so today than in the 17 years that we've been in business conducting surveys about it. It's been a topic we study every single year, and every single year it seems to gain in importance. This year is no exception to that. So let's just jump right into it. Brian, what did we see in this year's report that made it so much different than years past?
Well, it's a good question. This was a big year because a bunch of issues came together into two major themes. And we've been studying, as you say, we've been studying the supply chain for a long time, and we've either looked at the supplier side, the incoming product to the retailer's warehouse from the supplier, or outbound to the consumer. And we've alternately studied each one of those. And there are lots of issues, of course, in both sides of the equation. But this year, the issue was really about two meta themes. The first was agility, and the second was resilience. We'll define it this way. Agility is the ability for a supply chain to respond quickly to unexpected changes in consumer demand. And this has come to the forefront as a result of new shopping behaviors that emerged after COVID. The other side is resilience, and resilience is all about the ability to respond quickly to shocks in the supply chain itself. And of course, we saw lots and lots of these supply chain shocks during the pandemic, ports getting clogged up, goods not being able to leave China, those kinds of things, lots of issues, customs issues at the port of entry, even over the land issues with rolling stock. All of these things were big challenges. At the same time, what consumers are desiring is the ability to see into available to promise inventory wherever a retailer has it. So as a superimposed on this issue is the fact that demand no longer reliably starts in a store exclusively, and it is no longer fulfilled in a store exclusively. So demand can come from a number of different sources, and it can be fulfilled in a number of different ways. You couple that with the need for an agile response to changes in consumer demand and an agile response or a resilient response to shocks in the supply chain, and you have a business model, the retail business model, which is seriously challenged on all fronts. And all of this came together this year, the first year after the pandemic, when retailers really had to face the music and understand that some big structural changes are necessary.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, I feel like I'm cheating here a little bit because I know the answers to some of these questions, but even just hearing you walk through that, it brings me back to how different this report was than in years past. Should probably, just for folks who are joining us who may or may not be familiar with our business model, what we do is conduct anywhere between 10 and 12 benchmark reports a year. We survey retailers to find out what's important to them, what's keeping them up at night, and then we report that data in an aggregated way. We never share the results of, or we never share the names of the people who respond to these things. But over the 17 years that we've been in business, we've built a fairly impressive network of retailers who feel comfortable telling us these things because they know for that very reason, we're not going to turn around and share their information. So they're really candid with us. And one of the topics, of course, this year was the supply chain. Brian, one of the things we did this year that I think is probably worth digging into a little bit is we rebranded the term supply chain. We no longer refer to it as a supply chain. This is the first year we've started referring to it as a supply network. Why is that? And can you tell me a little bit about the impetus behind why we did that?
It's aspirational, of course. Supply chains still exist, but they need to be supply networks, and this gets to the resiliency issue. So to understand what I'm saying here, when we wrote these words, let's talk about the difference between a chain and a network. We all remember the days when our data networks were really chains. They were hierarchical. You had a hard connection to host someplace, and everything was serial in nature. You started at the top and you worked to your hard connection. Then we all adopted internet technologies, which were a true network, a peer-to-peer network, lots and lots of nodes of equal strength and value. And so if one node went down, you could get around and you could send a message another way. Networks are much, much more resilient than chains. My generation of retail technologists built supply chains with one goal in mind, and that was to deliver products to market at the lowest unit cost of goods. And so what we did is we tightly integrated the components of that supply chain, and it's highly verticalized. It's straight up and down. Now that was really fast and really reliable and really inflexible, but it did its job. It did what it needed to do. And that was the age of the mass merchant. So we rationalized our assortments and we delivered these goods to market in a highly reliable way at the lowest unit cost of goods. But it was really more about what the retailer and the manufacturer wanted to sell to consumers rather than what consumers wanted to buy. All of that got blown up really starting in 2007 with the iPhone, and consumers started searching the world for their products, and it reached its peak with the COVID pandemic. So now we're talking about supply chain networks or supply networks where if one part of the network cannot supply demand, then another node can, and you can work much in a much more agile way. And that's why we call it a network. Now, as I said, it's aspirational. A lot of retailers know that they need to do this, and our research shows that although they recognize the need, they're very early days in addressing it. And there's some fundamental things they need to do to make it happen.
That's very interesting. So, the anomaly that was the long version of the COVID pandemic brought this to light, not just for retailers, but for consumers as well. I
Right.
think a lot of people, as shoppers, we all started noticing, wait, the things that I want to buy are not available. Why is that? And all of a sudden, supply chain conversations are coming up at the dinner table all across the world, which is a really interesting. I mean, you and I have been doing this for a long time, and I don't think many of our loved ones and spouses truly understood what we did until the pandemic hit. You've
That's
talked
true.
a lot, yeah, you've talked a lot about the morphing nature of consumers. Has that played out as, in our research, we always look at the external pressures pushing on the retailers, and then we move to how are the best retailers able to convert some of those external challenges into opportunities.
Right.
Have the external challenges and the nature of their change, has that started to resonate with retailers? Are they aware of just how far behind they are and how much they need to change to adapt more of this network mentality?
Yeah, they're certainly aware of it. Now, this brings up what they're actually doing about it. I mentioned agility versus resilience. One is tactical and the other is strategic. So agility is really a tactical response to what's happening in the marketplace today. And retailers are, in fact, working hard to address that. They're addressing that in two ways, and it's important. The first is better forecasting. And what we mean by this is essentially a forecasting process which is continually adjusting the allocations and the replenishments to meet the near-term changes in demand. So it's not a you don't do it once and then let it flow. You're continually remeasuring. The other side of that is visibility. And in order to really effectively do that, you have to know where your inventory is. And retailers are paying close attention to that. The real-time visibility into inventory with a degree of precision and accuracy that wasn't necessary before is really important in today's world, because consumers want to be able to see available to promise inventory. And that's not just in the store or in the warehouse, but it could also be in the supply chain. So retailers are addressing that. The resilience issue, redesigning your supply chain to become a supply network, that's a much bigger deal. That is a fundamental redesign of the entire supplier side of the business model, and it's very difficult.
So, at the risk of getting into school grades here, how are retailers doing? Are there differences in the ability of certain retailers to tackle this in a more meaningful way, either by where they might be based or what they might be selling or what their sales performance might look like? Talk through some of the differences you saw there.
Yeah, it's a great question. Our research typically teases out of the data those retailers that we call winners. Winners are overperformers, and they overperform the market and their peers in various capabilities. And it's surprisingly reliable in our studies. So essentially, when we make recommendations to retailers, we basically are saying to the readership, if you want to be a winner, do what winners do. It's very practical advice. Here are some of the things that winners both value more than other retailers do and perform better. Monitoring capacity and add more when market conditions demand it. Modeling contingency plans for severe supply chain interruptions. Understand the impact of bottlenecks and prioritize the ones which need to be addressed most. Simulate the effect of changes in the supply chain before you actually implement them. Determine the optimal number of facilities and locations, considering mid to long-term demand projections, and to model the impact of business mergers on the supply chain. In each of those areas, winners both assign more value to those capabilities and are doing better at it. And it's just a good example of how different these retailers are responding.
And that's not particularly unique just to this particular report, right? That simulation piece, the ability to model the future before you make important decisions that could have a serious effect on your ability to deliver to the consumer at the point of demand when they really want it. That's
Right.
becoming thematic throughout our research. We've seen it in KPI reports, we've seen it in merchandising reports, we saw it here in this report, and I don't imagine that will be the last time we see that in 2023.
This is where AI comes into the storyline. Now, we usually don't study technologies divorced of the use cases that drive its adoption. But in many cases, AI has been a real enlightening enabler. And this is one of those cases. The ability to model situations or scenarios based on new data is turning out to be really, really critical. Now, what new data are we talking about? Think about what retailers did in the past. It was basically modeling the next period based on the transactions that were generated in the last period. And then you add in the variables. You know, am I going to run a promo? Have I opened new stores? Have I entered a new market? But it's all based on an understanding of the transactional flows. Now we have social sentiment, we have data from the internet, we have weather, we have market data, we have geopolitical information. All of these things are valuable in helping us to model scenarios in order to pick the one that works best for us and then to implement. And that's really, really important.
It almost seems like too big of an ask too quickly, doesn't it?
It's a lot. It's because I would say that it fundamentally challenges the business model. And that's a big deal.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this entire report, I think this one turned out to be 30 plus pages. There's at least 25 charts full of
There
all kinds
are.
of data in here. It's all available on our website. Like everything we do, it's available for free. So if this conversation has piqued your interest at all, we invite you to visit www.rsrresearch.com. And if you look at our recent insights tab, you will see that this, among a whole host of other reports, are available for free to you and have quite a bit of insight. But Brian, for folks who are in a hurry and they just have time to remember a few things from this report, from our conversation here today, what are some of the things that you think need to be, takeaways from this report for folks to keep in mind?
It's a great question. So the very first thing you need to do is acknowledge the situation. We're in a change period. It's a tumultuous change. It has strategic and tactical implications. So number one, acknowledge that the situation has changed. And that implies that you need to rethink many of the old ways of doing business. The supply chain is easily the most over-engineered part of most retailers' business models. And therefore, retailers are a little reticent about attacking it with new ideas, but they really need to think about it. One of the things that we recommend that retailers should do is look at it from the eyes of the consumer. Instead of looking at it about your traditional value proposition and bringing the lowest cost of goods to the market in a predictable way, think the way consumers do. Consumers have the whole universe at their fingertips. Retailers need to think about the implications of that. We didn't talk about this, but we really should at least mention it, is the new generation of consumers are particularly sensitive to sustainability issues. And we could probably spend another 20 minutes talking about
Well,
this.
that's thematic to our
Yeah,
research too, right? It keeps showing up
it is.
every
Yep.
single topic that we touch. It keeps showing up in one way or another.
Hmm. Next one I would say is if you are not addressing the new generation of forecasting capabilities, you need to jump on it.
Yeah.
We know this from our travels, Steve, that retailers were really addressing this in a meaningful way. The science that's available for retailers to forecast their business is so improved over past that it's incumbent upon all retailers to take a hard look at it. And as a part of that, you need to get over whatever you have about AI. You know, people love to talk about Chat GPT and how it's going to, I think we're going to be extinct because of Chat GPT,
Yeah.
according to some
Yeah. I mean,
newspaper. Uh, but in the meantime, it has a practical use, and that is to be able to forecast scenarios. And retailers need to take that seriously.
that's a great subhead for whatever AI research we do in the future. AI. But in the meantime,
Yeah, we're all going to die,
before
but
your
in the
overlords come.
meantime,
Yeah. No, it's really sage advice, and I think of all of those things. I mean, I think of all the really important information in this report can be distilled down into one thing you just said, which is if you think about the brand the way your consumer does, there's probably a very good chance you're going to get ahead of some of these issues, or at least have the ability to catch up.
yeah,
And it becomes very apparent when certain retailers do and don't do that. It becomes very apparent to us shoppers. So
yeah,
again, I mean, if there's any parting thoughts that we didn't get to, I think it was a pretty succinct version of having a conversation of a really big topic that we've been trying to call the next big topic since at least 2013, maybe 2014. We've been calling
yeah.
supply chain the issue that you must pay attention to. This is the next big thing to hit retail. And unfortunately, it took a global pandemic to really drive that home for a lot of folks, but it certainly has become just that.
Well, my parting words would be read the report.
Read the
Um,
report. Yeah,
read the
yeah,
report.
absolutely.
All right. Thank you,
And there
Steve.
you have it. So thank you for joining me, Brian.
It was a
And thank
pleasure.
you to IORMA, who has been our partner on this report. Again, if you're interested in reading it, it's free to the entire world. You just visit rsrresearch.com. You look under recent research, and the official title of this one is The Quest for a Resilient and Agile Supply Network. So thanks all. See you again soon.